Washington Journal continues.
Bill Samii, how involved in Iraq is Iran?
I think it's involved in many ways extensively, and the depth of its involvement is very impressive. I mean, for Iran, Iraq is an important religious source. Some of the major Shiite shrines are based in the city of Najaf. Iran has business interests in Iraq. It's already involved with the Iraqi power sector. It's exporting natural gas to Iraq. And then politically, the Iranian government was one of the first governments to actually recognize the new leadership in Iraq.
What about on the violence level?
The extent of that is very hard to say. There have been reports of personnel from Iran's Islamic Revolution Guards Corps and its Special Operations Unit, the Quds Force, traveling back and forth into Iraq. It's believed that there are approximately 150 of them at any given time. And then they're supposed to be providing various weapons and allegedly providing these shaped charges that are of greater sophistication than one has seen in the past in the Iraqi violence. But that's the kind of information that's not available to average media or to normal citizens looking into these affairs.
So when you say, why do you make that point?
Well, I think the point is that Tehran, when it says, show some evidence of our wrongdoing and of our interference in Iraqi affairs, one is hard put to actually do that. I mean, the only people who can do that are government sources. And I think government sources are reluctant to give up their methods and methodology of securing this kind of information.
Is there proof of any military trade or any military arms being shipped across the Iran-Iraq border?
From what I've read, there is, but it's very interesting. You'll see one person from one government agency saying that, yes, there's proof of this, there are these soldiers there, and so on. And then you have people, for example, from the British forces who are patrolling the border saying that they haven't seen anything very substantive to support these allegations.
What about President Ahmadinejad?
Right.
And what does he want to have happen in Iraq?
That's an interesting point. I think from Ahmadinejad's perspective, and I'm meaning that him and this sort of generation of hardliners who came into office with him, what they want to see is one of two things: a humiliated United States staying in the country, unable to bring about a successful transition to a democratic state. On the other hand, what they'd like to see is the United States leaving Iraq with its tail between its legs, again with a lack of success in its efforts in the region.
Bill Samii is with the Center for Naval Analyses, which is what?
Center for Naval Analyses is a federally funded research and development center. It was established, I think it was around the time of World War II, and it does support activities for the Department of the Navy mostly.
And so are you considered a government employee?
No, I'm not. I'm an employee of a private organization.
And previously a ranger in the U.S. Army?
Yes.
And you worked for Radio Free Europe for a while?
Yes.
Why did you get interested in Iran?
Well, my father is Iranian. I lived in the country for 8 years, and when I was as an undergraduate and then in graduate school, I don't know if it works this way with others, but I was trying to figure out what I was good at and what interested me, and this seemed to be a natural thing for me.
In his State of the Union address, President Bush asked for Iran to stop killing our soldiers.
Right.
How did you interpret that? What did he mean?
I think, I wouldn't say it's a casus belli, but I think the implication is that we only have so much tolerance for this kind of thing. And then I saw in the Washington Post on the 25th an article saying that the U.S. military personnel have been authorized to take action against the Iranian operatives in Iraq. So I think it's a pretty clear signal to Iran that we've sort of had our fill of having Americans killed due to their activities, either direct or indirect.
And what number would you put on the Iranian operatives? I raise that because I think you mentioned 150 at one point.
Right.
But there's a newspaper in Baghdad, according to IraqSlogger.com, that's
Right.
saying that there are 32,000 Iranian operatives.
That's just it. You know, it's the traffic across the border is so extensive that is it 150 or 30,000 plus? It's very hard to say because you've got these pilgrims going back and forth across the border. You've got smugglers. You've got legitimate business people trafficking.
Rather porous border?
That's an understatement. You
Why?
know, it's long, it's rugged terrain. There aren't that many troops. I think the British are dealing with most of the border patrol, and they just don't have enough personnel to secure that border. And the Iranian government, too. You'll frequently see statements from the government telling Iranian citizens not to enter Iraq due to when there's a spike in the violence. But the Iranian pilgrims just go across anyway, and if they can't go the legal, legitimate ways, they'll go in the less legit ways. And it's a little sad because you read about them ending up in minefields that are left over from the war, or just getting lost out in the desert and dying of thirst.
You mean the 1980 war?
Yes, 80 to 88 Iran-Iraq war.
First call out for Bill Samii, and we are discussing Iran's involvement in Iraq, is from East Haddam, Connecticut. Go ahead. Connecticut, go ahead.
Yes, I was just wondering if the American people are realize that the Iranians possess Sunburn and Onyx anti-ship missiles. President Bush is bringing in a second aircraft carrier fleet into the Persian Gulf, which is known for being. I mean, once you get the ships in there, they really can't maneuver all that well. And if they do decide to strike the Iranian, or if the Israelis decide to strike the Iranian nuclear facilities, that our ships, all our naval personnel, will be extremely vulnerable to those anti-ship missiles. Now, are they as unstoppable as the Internet says they are as far as the Onyx goes, which far surpasses the Sunburn missile? I'd like to hear your comment on that. And also, the American people have to wise up and get the Zionists out of Washington, D.C. Thank you.
That's actually an interesting question because as you say, there's another aircraft carrier heading towards the Persian Gulf. And for the Iranian government or for the Iranian military, this idea of area denial, keeping foreign forces out of the Persian Gulf, out of the Gulf of Oman, is very important to them. And so they've set up these anti-ship missile batteries all along the Persian Gulf coast. I'm pretty confident that the U.S. military is able to withstand this, but it is something to bear in mind. And it's one of the factors, you know, why is Iran building up these extensive military capabilities along its borders? I mean, it suggests to me that they have ulterior motives. They're going beyond what would seem a normal requirement for defensive needs.
Well, what's our motive for having two aircraft carrier groups?
I think that's, one is sending a pretty clear message, and two, sending a clear message.
St. Petersburg, Florida, Democrat.
Yes, good morning, and thank you for taking my call.
Good morning.
I'd like to ask you, do you think that if we do go to war with Iran, do you think the Saudis or the Israelis will become involved? And what will happen to the world oil supply?
Well, thank you for your question. Actually, obviously I hope that there is no war. I think the other regional states, Saudi Arabia, even Israel, which some interpret as being quite bellicose, the Israeli government officials have made it clear that war is the last thing they want to see. They would really rather see the Iran issue, and when I say Iran issue, really the nuclear topic, they want to see this settled through diplomatic means. It seems to me that no rational actor wants to see a war break out. It would have no positive benefit for anybody in the region.
Article in the New York Daily News this morning, Saudis tell Iranians to back off. King Abdullah issued a veiled warning to Iran to quit what he said were efforts to spread Shiism in the Sunni-dominated Arab world and to slow down on its nuclear policy.
I think this is an interesting point. There have been concerns raised again that the Iranian government has sort of revived policies that it had back in the 1980s when it was trying to foment unrest among Shiite minorities throughout the Arab world. There are Shiites in Saudi Arabia, in Bahrain, in Iraq, obviously, in Kuwait, in Lebanon, and even in Syria, although Iran has not tried to cause any trouble in Syria. And so all these states have a genuine concern, and they've expressed their concerns before that the Iranians are trying to stir up problems there. I think this reflects, one, a genuine concern on the part of the governments. Two, there's been talk, and especially from Washington, we're hearing the talk about this possible Sunni-Shiite clash in the region, and perhaps that's why they're making some of these statements, the Saudis specifically.
North Hollywood, California. Good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, with this problem with Iran, the liberals and the Democrats, they think the solution is to just go have a chat with Mujahideen. I guess they think they're going to sit around, toast marshmallows, and sing Kumbaya, and everything will be all right. I think we should send them a couple of pictures of Nagasaki and Hiroshima and let them wake up. Now, my question to the gentleman today is, how do we get any information out of Iran? Do we have any agents there for intelligence purposes, or what is our source of information from that country?
My understanding, again, I think it was the House the House Intelligence Committee had done a study a few years ago and expressed concern about the lack of human sources that we have on the ground in Iran. But there's obviously a lot of monitoring of what the Iranians do. And, it's very interesting. They keep certain aspects of their affairs very secret, whether it's the nuclear issue, military issues, or some of the more nuanced government decisions that take place. But a lot of what happens in Iran is readily available in the country's press. It's sort of a contradiction, but they're very open in some ways. And, it's easy to, if you just keep an eye on what's being said by officials, to see the course of domestic political events.
We're told time and time again that the Iranian people love America,
right,
and really want to be pals. We get calls all the time on this program from Iran. What are your thoughts?
I agree with you that Iranian people, and I think people in most countries generally, they're not interested in these sort of clashes of civilizations and so on, and the hostile rhetoric that their governments might have. Basically, they want to conduct normal lives, have better lives for their children than they had themselves. That being said, one of the problems with Iran is that there's a sort of a media blackout. The state controls all broadcast media. Newspapers don't have a great deal of circulation. So what the average Iranian citizen hears about other countries is what its government wants it to hear and believe. And I think the Iranian government makes a real effort to manipulate the way people perceive the rest of the world.
In the Washington Post this morning, this editorial, cracks in Iran, the Bush administration's recent steps against Iran, which have included the dispatch of a second aircraft carrier to the Persian Gulf and the arrest of Iranian agents in Iraq, have worried a lot of people in Washington who fear that the White House may be gearing up for another war. Are we gearing up for another war in your view?
No, I really don't think so. I'm not a grand strategist, but it seems very unlikely to me. I think we have enough on our plate already.
And it goes on to say that fortunately some influential people in Tehran appear to be getting nervous as well. The stock market is dropping. Capital flight is accelerating. Some influential voices have begun publicly suggesting that flexibility as well as toughness is needed in dealing with the West. Pressure is growing on radical President Ahmadinejad, who has been rebuked by voters in recent elections, by parliamentary resolutions, and by editorials in newspapers that reflect the views of his country's supreme leader, Ayatollah Ali Khamenei.
Ahmadinejad has been getting hammered domestically almost from the day he took office. The parliament in August of 2005 rejected 4 of the men he rejected for cabinet or submitted for cabinet positions. Now, this is unprecedented in Iranian politics. This guy had no honeymoon. I mean, he was getting hammered by the parliament. The stock market in Iran went down within months of the guy taking office. It's just that it's happening now again, or we're hearing more about it now. And there's always been a lot of opposition to him. He's really trying to change the system from within, and so the resistance is natural. We also have to reflect on the fact that he has a sort of limited influence within the foreign policy making. It's a consensual process in which you've got the supreme leader, you've got Mr. Hashemi Rafsanjani, a number of other top officials who have inputs into the process.
Next call for Bill Samii of the Center for Naval Analyses comes from Brighton, England. Go ahead.
Yeah, hi. I just want to make a statement about this speculation that's twirling around, that's been perpetuated by the American media in readiness or in some sort of, anticipated justification for actions against Iran. Now, let's get back to basics. What we need, whether it's in a legitimate court of law or dealing with international issues, what we need is evidence. That's what we need. But let's get back to another issue. I'm actually, you'll find that most people in the UK are actually completely against the war and Britain and America's involvement in it. But I think it's good. I think it's good that the US are in Iraq, and I personally want them to stay there. I think that's the best place for America, because when you've got a bully and when you've got a high-handed, self-appointed policeman who takes it upon itself to impose its will and its conditions and its culture on other cultures, right? I think it should pay the consequences. I don't think America should be allowed to leave scot-free from the responsibilities and the devastation that is caused to Iraq. And I think that America deserves to stay in Iraq. I hope it stays there for the next 50 years.
Oh, well, I suspect you're in the minority with that hope, whether it's others in the UK, people in the United States, the Iraqi people. I don't think anyone wants to see the United States remain there for 50 years. I think the United States wants to stay in Iraq, help bring about a democratic government in the country, and then leave. I don't think the United States has imperialist designs on the rest of the world or colonial ambitions as some countries have had in the past. Now, in terms of the point about evidence of this demand for evidence of what Iran is allegedly up to, this is an interesting point, but international affairs just isn't a court of law. It's not the kind of place where ample evidence can just be dragged out. And another point about the evidence I think that is very interesting and is that after the Iraq episode, when there was this alleged slam dunk of Iraqi nuclear weapons, and of course this stuff didn't turn up, I think there's a greater demand for solid, evidence of what the Iranians are doing before anybody takes action. I don't think other countries are going to accept at face value the claim that Iran is pursuing WMD. That things have to be seen, some sort of proof has to be available.
Bill Samii received both his PhD and Master's of Philosophy at the University of Cambridge. His bachelor's is from American University here in Washington. San Diego, go ahead.
Yes, Mr. Samii, unlike you, I think countries like Iran and Iraq before Saddam was deposed are on probation. It's up to them to prove to us that they don't have weapons of mass destruction, not for us to prove beyond a shadow of a New York court's judgment that they do have them. Let's get back to World War II and how Nazis around the world said Hitler is simply trying to straighten out a few problems in Central Europe. I think we have to remember Chamberlain's appeasement when we go to Iran and talk about diplomacy with another Hitler. I think you should know from your Iranian background that Ahmadinejad represents a very strong and dangerous force in the Shia Crescent, and that they're not going to be satisfied with conventional weapons. You better wake up and tell the American government and the American people the threat that they're under. Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. I agree with you that I too believe that the Iranian government is pursuing nuclear weapons. It's something they want. That being said, I don't think too many people are going to accept at face value what Bill Samii has to say. They would like something more substantive if they're going to enter into a conflict with the country. Furthermore, it's other countries that are demanding this proof. It's not just something that I pulled out of a hat that I want to see it and I'm going to take the Iranian government's words. You know, I mean, in my own defense, if I may, I've written pretty extensively on this subject and argued that my own belief that the Iranians are pursuing WMD. Furthermore, it's not a religious demand that a country have weapons of mass destruction. And the suggestion that I've seen elsewhere that the Iranians are somehow suicidal and they want to bring about global Armageddon, I think is far-fetched. There may be some within the Iranian regime that think in those terms, but I believe they're a distinct minority.
We have another call from Tehran. Go ahead, Tehran.
Okay, I'm calling from Tehran. I want you to know that Iranians, at least most of Iranians, don't like to have any clash with the United States. They don't want to have a war, or they are not warmongers. And the only reason that they had the 8 years war with Iraq was these Iraqis, Saddam Hussein attacked them, and I think international community have approved of this matter. Okay, my question is that why the government of the United States don't go after the Sunni insurgency and their backers, which at least some of even the United States media say that it comes from some Arab countries, some extremist countries. And why they just only point on Iran and, say, Shiite people, as they have been the minority and they have been suppressed by Saddam Hussein and most of the Sunnis, please.
Caller, before you leave, what do you do in Tehran?
I'm a journalist.
You're a journalist. For what outfit?
Actually, I'm a journalist for a domestic newspaper.
Okay. And what's your feeling on President Ahmadinejad?
Well, I think, as you commented, and I think it's right that he has got quite a lot of pressure from even inside the country. And even I don't think our supreme leader, Mr. Khamenei, nowadays approve of him, because he has showed a lot of incapability, even especially in terms of foreign policy. And I think a lot of people who care about revolution, who care about country, will ask him and will give him quite a tough time to change a little bit of policy.
Caller, could you hang on? I think Bill Samii, our guest, has a question for you.
I was just wondering which newspaper it is you're with.
Well, actually, especially if I keep it to myself, and just a domestic newspaper I work for.
And finally, caller, how are you watching C-SPAN?
Your programs are available in Iran through the satellite system, and I think a lot of Iranians watch your program, and I like your program, and I've seen you have asked quite a lot of good guests, and I've heard quite a lot of good comments on your programs, a lot of interesting and realistic thoughts.
Thank you for calling in, Bill Samii.
I think that was really interesting to hear the voice from somebody in Iran about their own views, their own perceptions. I think is invaluable. You know, in terms of, for example, why he can't identify the newspaper he works for, I find that kind of interesting too, because in fact the Iranian government in August of last year actually forbade people from giving interviews, forbade Iranians from giving interviews to Persian language broadcasters other than the state media. And you know, I think this is kind of sad that people in their own country are having their right of free expression curtailed by the government. It's a sad state of affairs. And as your caller said, and I think I made this point earlier, the Iranian people aren't warmongers. They have some figures within their regime who are espousing a rather radical line, such as Mr. Ahmadinejad and the circle around him. But I think they're in a distinct minority.
Next call for Bill Samii, St. Croix, Virgin Islands. Go ahead. Whoops. Helps if I push a button, and it's actually Olathe, Kansas. Go ahead.
Hi. Thanks for taking my call. I had kind of a roundabout question concerning the alleged Iranian influence attacking our troops. Am I making sense here? It seems like there's been a lot of Sunni infiltration coming from Saudi Arabia, from Jordan. Al-Qaeda is a known Sunni organization that has attacked Shia Muslims in the past. Is it possible that Iran has a right to help the Iraqi Shias to train and protect their community and some of the religious shrines against Al-Qaeda?
Obviously, we should, help the Iraqis set up their own security apparatus so they can defend their own country from outside sources of aggression. I think this is what the United States is trying to do. But the fact is that until they're able to defend themselves and bring about the security of their own country, we need to help them do that. It's once stability is restored in the country, once security is restored, we can withdraw and they can have a stable, independent government. Actually, I'd like to get back to one thing that the previous caller had asked about, and that was the problem of Sunni unrest in the region and the sort of Sunni-driven violence in Iraq itself. I think this is a very good point, that a lot of the people fighting in Iraq are not actually Iraqis. They're these jihadists coming in from other Arab states who are causing the difficulties there. And many of the victims of the violence there are actually Iraqi people, not the so-called occupation forces. And, so I'm not sure who the people behind the violence think they're really helping. It's really kind of what their logic is unclear to me.
Last call for our guest, Bill Samii, is from St. Croix, Virgin Islands. Go ahead.
Good morning.
Good morning.
I'm listening to the program, and actually I'm saying our problem is not with the Iranian people per se. They got a minority that would agree, work good relations West. However, majority of Iranians are taught from children to be against any Americanized way of life, and even trained to destroy or to damage America. I'm pretty sure they are being trained. So we are right now in the front door of Iran, because we are in Iraq. We need to deal with this as a whole. We cannot go and say, well, we're going to Iraq and leave for later. Iran, why are you leaving for later? We are right.
We're having a bit of trouble with the connection, but I have to tell you that, for the most part, everyone I've talked to, every Iranian I've met, has been a very friendly, warm person. This isn't a matter of personal hostility expressed by the average Iranian citizen. It's something their regime expresses. You've got these regime-organized rallies at which they chant, death to America, great Satan, etc. This isn't the average person, and if you read any of the excellent books written by journalists such as Elaine Sciolino or Afshin Molavi about the Iranian people, these books show that these are friendly, warm people who are not hostile to the rest of the world. It's the regime that's doing this, and I think it's the regime that concerns other countries, not the Iranian people. And another point we ought to note is that, just because children are because the government tries to indoctrinate children through the educational system and through the media, doesn't mean it's always going to be successful at doing that.
Bill Samii has been our guest. He's with the Center for Naval Analyses. Thank you for talking with us about Iran.
Thank you very much. It's a pleasure to be here.
About an hour left in the Washington Journal. In about 15 minutes, Eason Jordan will be joining us. He's the founder of IraqSlogger.com, in case you'd like to go to that website and check it out. former chief news executive at CNN, will be talking about U.S. policy in Iraq. Open phones for the next 15 minutes. We're going to put the numbers up on the screen. 202 is the area code, 737-0002 for Democrats, 737-0001 for Republicans, and 628-0205 for Independents. We will take as many calls as we can in the next 15 minutes. Also want to let you know about a new service we have here at C-SPAN. It's called Viewfinder, and this is a chance for you to send video to us and talk about who your favorite American president is. It's a very easy system. You can go to cspan.org and click on Viewfinder, and you will be able to upload video. And what we're asking you to do is send us a minute or so talking about who your favorite president is. We'll be airing these over President's Day weekend in mid-February. You can see Viewfinder there on the screen, but we want to know who your favorite president is and why. cspan.org, and go click on Viewfinder, which is down on the left-hand side of that front website. First call up is from McDonald, Pennsylvania, in open phones. Go ahead, McDonald.
Hello.
Hi.
I wanted to speak to the man you had, Mr. Samii, on before. I believe that our government is more or less like taunting Iran into a war, and I've been so afraid of it. I heard Senator Santorum last year in February speaking about Iran, how the women weren't treated right, and like starting the debate about going to Iran. I think this was planned a long time ago, and I think that our government actually wants to use nuclear weapons. I am just so afraid. I don't want Third World War. I'd like for my grandchildren to enjoy the world we have, and I'm afraid that it's not going to be there for much longer if President Bush and Vice President Cheney and them are still in office. I'm afraid for that.
All right. Thank you for that call. Next call comes from Rio de Janeiro down in Brazil. Go ahead, Rio.
Yes, two comments. One is about Iraq, and the other one is about the same part of the world. I honestly believe that if the U.S. seriously and honestly resolve the issue, that will give no more excuse to anybody in that region, whether it's Iran or however, resolve the issue that between the Israelis and the Palestinians fairly and really look into it genuinely, not just propaganda by some pressure group in D.C. The other issue with regard to Iraq, and I know you have some folks coming and talking about this morning, what we have done is really replaced one nutcase by others who are equally or maybe more corrupt, such as Jalal Talabani and Nouri al-Maliki. I have very familiar with that part of the world. Basically, these folks are more corrupt. They have millions and millions of dollars, probably the U.S. taxpayers' money, now stashed away in the Switzerland bank. As soon as the regime fails, they will bail out. Their families are already in Europe and all over Switzerland and other parts of the world, Australia. You got Jalal Talabani, his boys and kids all over with billions of dollars and driving Ferraris. And so I don't know what in the world have we done in Iraq, or the world have done, basically have created even worse nightmare. I hope and pray that the U.S. Maybe create a better solution, maybe think out, as the old saying, outside the box, because what's happening is even going to be worse than what has happened in the past.
Caller, why are you familiar with that part of the world?
I have worked for an international company for 20-some years.
I'm sorry, what kind of company?
International, continental companies.
Right, what kind of work do you do?
Consulting for mega corporation in South America and in the U.S.
And do you feel that when you're down in Rio, when you're down in Brazil, isolated from a lot of these issues or not?
We have more access to media around international. If you have a few dollars to get access to the internet and other satellites, more than the U.S. I believe the U.S. audience are limited. They are not hearing everything going on in the world.
Right. I didn't mean via media, but just almost geographically. Do you feel isolated from a lot of the issues that the U.S. is confronting?
We that's correct. You said that correctly, sir.
And what part of Rio do you live in?
Actually, southern Rio, in the mountains.
Okay. And finally, sir, there's an issue about U.S. pilots and a bad plane crash. Is that still getting a lot of press down in Brazil?
No, I'm honest. To you, I was in southern Africa for about 18 months. So that issue, I will not give you an accurate answer because I don't know a whole lot.
Okay, well,
but I want to say also, yes, your network brings the info to the public as it is, not kind of sugar-coated and that C-SPAN should be emulated, or others should emulate C-SPAN program.
Well, thank you for calling in. We appreciate it.
Thank you.
Minneapolis, thanks for holding. Republican line, go ahead.
Yes, I was just calling to make a comment. I believe that we had to do something in this matter simply because the UN didn't show any backbone as far as enforcing resolutions. I'm not well versed with which resolutions, but Iraq was shooting at our planes. They were not respecting or following the rules that they agreed to follow. And I believe that we did have to do something. Now that we are there, the balance of power with Iran there is so strong. I believe it would be a mistake to pull out and just leave it.
Thank you for your call. Dover, Delaware, Independent.
Oh, hi. Thanks for taking my call. I'm just amazed at the press here now and our leaders in Washington. Everybody's ignoring an 800-pound gorilla in the living room. That is the fact that this war in Iraq was based on lies. It's illegal. We need to withdraw our troops as soon as possible. Just remember one thing. Churchill cut and run at Dunkirk. Hitler stayed the course in Stalingrad. And the rest is history. The world is not going to end if we withdraw from Iraq. Let those people in the Middle East, let them sort out their own problems. We need to stay out of it. We need to stop trying to control other nations and other peoples. We got a lot of problems here in this country we need to solve. Thank you.
Thank you for your call. Manchester, England, you're on the air. Open phones on C-SPAN.
Hello.
Go ahead, Manchester.
I wanted to express my views regarding the United States liberating the Iraqi people from the clutches of Saddam Hussein. That was the greatest favor which the United States has done to the Iraqi people. However, unfortunately, after doing such a great thing, the mistake which was done by the United States, in my view, was to let the Saddam's army go scot-free with all the weapons, etc., and they waited for the time to create all the trouble in Iraq. They are killing people, Shias as well as Sunnis, and they are being supported by the Saudi government and the Jordanians. As far as Iran is concerned, I think if the United States contacts Iran, talks directly to Iran, I think they are the most cultured people in the world. And I think they will be more reliable friends of the United States than the Saudis, the Jordanians, etc.
And where are you from originally, sir?
I'm from India.
You're from India. And how long have you lived in England?
I've been in England since the last 25 years.
Okay. All right. Thanks for calling in this morning. Right after this program at 10 a.m. Eastern Time is our Newsmakers program. And this week, the Deputy National Security Advisor, J.D. Crouch, takes questions from Doyle McManus, who's Washington Bureau Chief of the L.A. Times, and from the intelligence reporter for the Financial Times, Dimitri Sevastopoulos. Next, and that's right at 10 a.m. following this program. Jacksonville, Florida, you're on the air. Go ahead, open phones.
Yes, I wanted to make a comment about the caller that was an international worker. And prior to that, I wanted to talk to Mr. Samii, and I wanted to ask him what he knew of the information that we had gotten about that is now deemed incorrect, and everyone has addressed about our occupation in Iraq and why we went to Iraq, that it was false information. How do we know that that information was planted, or how do we not know that it wasn't planted by some of the other Arabian countries that are at war within themselves and the struggle that they may be having? And your international caller, he is working in South America. He's working in Africa. He's traveling the continent. And Al-Qaeda is all over. Terrorist groups are all over there in 55 nations of this earth and Africa. I mean, what is going on with Somalia and Darfur? It is all terrorist-related. And I don't understand why the American public cannot see the common thread that is linked throughout this entire world.
Thank you, caller. Orlando, Florida, Democrat, you're on the air. Open phones.
Yes, sir. I just want to say this, that George Bush has had over 4 years and $450 million to wage war of choice, of his choice over in Iraq. And for that 4 years and $450 billion, this is all he has to show for it. And when he spoke the other night, he did not say one word about Katrina. And going into the last election, I wasn't one of those Democratic voters who cast my vote to impeach George Bush. But as we stand right now, I am demanding impeachment and proceedings against George Bush. And the only true words that I want to hear spoken to George Bush is, Mr. President, you have the right to remain silent. Thank you.
Last call on open phones is from New Haven, Connecticut.
Yes, how are you? I have a couple concerns. I just wanted to know, do you feel that our country is equipped to handle a war in Iran? I feel that the war with Iran is definitely going to happen at one point or another. And do you feel that our military is ready? I feel that we face an extremely credible threat from that area, and I truly believe that Iran is seeking nuclear weapons, and at some point it's going to happen. And do you feel that we're ready?
Thank you for that call.